Welcome to anglos.co.il. Today we're going to be talking about renting a home in Israel, and once again we have in our studio with us Selwyn Hare from Home in Israel, powered by Keller Williams. Welcome, Selwyn.
How's it, Warren? Thanks. Nice to be here again.
In Israel, you sometimes have people that go through an agent, and sometimes people do it by themselves. What is the benefits of using somebody to help me with that, and of me doing it by myself?
All right. So first of all, there are a few aspects involved. First of all, by going through an agent, it doesn't matter whether you're a new immigrant or an Israeli. When you're going through a broker is going to find you exactly what you want. So it's going to save you all the time and hassles of seeing things that may not be what you need. As far as what we do as part of our service is when you rent an apartment in Israel, all the utilities are actually registered on the tenant's name. And the tenant is liable for paying all the utilities. In other words, your municipal tax, water, lights, gas, building levies. So all these things are paid by the tenant. So what we do is, can you imagine yourself spending a day at the municipality transferring or registering yourself as a new immigrant with a Hebrew at the municipal offices, transferring things into your name. So it's actually,
you do that?
Yes, that's part of our service.
I should have used you guys. My first agent didn't do all that for me.
It's part of our service. It's part of our service because we know what the new immigrant needs.
Right.
It's a nightmare for them. I promise you. I mean, again, it's not, when it comes to those things, it's not what you know, it's who you know, and it's how to you're not short-circuiting the system. Yeah. But it's getting things done. What will take us an hour will take you the day. And people will say to you, what did you do today? Oh, well, I spent my day at the municipality. Right. Okay, so that's basically what, and you probably won't get everything done because you're missing this document or that document. Right. So we've got all that. We can prepare all of that in advance, and we'll get it all done immediately. So yes, those are one of the advantages of using a broker. Okay. Also, obviously, for finding what you need. Yes.
If I'm using an agent, because obviously if I do it myself, there won't be any kind of fees on that side. What should I be looking at that I know to expect in terms of agent's fees, and what should I pay out over and above?
Agent fees, when it's a brokerage fee, when we're talking about rentals, you're looking at 1 month's rent plus VAT.
Okay, so that I'll pay over to you for the service that you provide for me.
Yes.
The first step, you've now found a place. You've got a landlord that you're in touch with. The contract. Will you assist me with that contract?
All right.
Because obviously my fear is as somebody coming in who doesn't know the lay of the land. The impression is that the agent is always working for the landlord, as opposed to having my best interests in heart.
Okay, so I'll tell you, first of all, in Israel, the broker is not allowed to draw up the contract. Okay. The contract has to be drawn up by a lawyer.
Okay.
So, or it's done by the owner.
He just downloaded
and the tenant. From some. So there are contracts that are ready and downloaded. Obviously, we look after both sides' interests, because at the end of the day, you've got to realize one thing, that when a tenant is renting out an apartment, the owner is giving an asset worth a couple of million shekels. Yes. And the tenant is only paying a monthly fee on that. So the most important part that the owner is going to look for in a contract are the securities. Yes. Okay, so we will obviously help both sides so that the agreement is fair, both to the tenant and to the owner, where we're looking after the owner's interests as far as his rent, which he's supposed to be getting, and that the apartment's been looked after, on the one hand, and on the other hand, looking on the tenant's interest so that the tenant A is not A, overpaying, B, that his interests are also being looked after, that they're not being, that he's not having to give too much securities regarding the actual apartment. Just
regarding those securities, now, obviously in my experience here and speaking to other people, there seems to be different kinds of securities and different things that are expected depending on the landlord. Sometimes people are, give a check for it with a month's rent. Sometimes it seems to be 3 months' rent. What should I be looking at in terms of securities?
There are a few options available. Okay. Also, it depends on what the rent. Obviously, if it's a luxury apartment, well, if you're going to be able to, a luxury apartment, the owners would normally like either a 3-month bank guarantee or a 3-month deposit to be deposited, to be cashed. In fact, it's not a check that you're just holding.
Yes.
That if you don't pay, well, then I'm going to deposit the check.
Yes.
Because between you and me, if the tenant hasn't paid for a few months, and now the landlord takes that check that he's got as a deposit, as a security, and deposits it, that check's obviously not going to go through either. So that check's actually not worth the paper it's written on. So those are the reasons why there's a deposit, a cash deposit or a bank guarantee, or they can have guarantors who will sign basically an IOU, who will be responsible should the tenant default.
Got you. So you can have different types of security depending on the arrangement between the landlord and the tenant, and as you say, it just depends on what the extent of those securities is and how you go about.
Correct. The normal situation, the security is normally a 3-month security. Whether it's a 3-month security, whether it's a bank guarantee for 3 months, whether it's an IOU for three months, but the 3 months is normally even if a guarantor signs, it's going to be a 3-month security. For the simple reason that in Israel today, to evict a tenant, takes approximately 3 months. So this way, the landlord is not out of pocket if the tenant defaults.
But it could be less or more depending on the discretion of the landlord and what he wants, right? I'm just saying it's not set in stone.
No, it's not set in stone. It's not, but that is the norm is approximately is a 3-month guarantee.
Got you. I just want to take a step back because I always tell people, whether it's renting or any kind of business arrangement, I believe that contracts are very important. Because
100%.
Even if it's between friends renting from each other, working together, whatever the environment is, because then it always it takes away any kind of misunderstanding and it governs the relationship. Everything's down on paper and everybody understands everything.
It's very simple. The reason why you do a contract, even between friends, is so that you will remain friends afterwards.
Exactly.
Very simple.
Now, in those contracts, I always tell people that are, especially people that don't have Hebrew and these long legal contracts in Hebrew, especially if you're signing it. Maybe sometimes people sign these documents even before they get you to make sure they've got a place to stay. I always tell people, understand the contract. Get somebody to translate it for you if necessary. By the way, if you come to our website, anglos.co.il, and ask us the question, we can also refer you to people that work in those fields to assist you with understanding those contracts.
Just one other thing, what a lot of people do is, and which I most strongly do not recommend, is don't use Google Translate.
Correct.
Do not use Google Translate. I'm very happy to go through a contract, and we've done it not once, we do it all the time, where I will go through the contract with the client so that they understand exactly what they're signing. It is very, very important.
Absolutely.
It's an individual thing, but having a document, a contract, a 4 or 5 page document translated could also be, it could be costly.
Either get somebody to sit with you and go through it,
100%.
or get it translated. I was just going to add, don't use Google Translate.
Absolutely.
Because legal speak is very different, and there's
100%.
sometimes nuances in the contract that
come out completely the other way.
Correct. So if you're prepared to spend the money, a little bit of money to have it translated, or if somebody's kind enough to sit with you, always go through the document and make sure you understand all the details.
Correct.
What sorts of things are the responsibility of the landlord, and what sorts of things should be the responsibility of the tenant? So, for example, when I'm renting, if I break the door handle.
All right, let's take, for example, there are a few things. The door handle is a small issue. But if you break the door handle, it's your responsibility to get it fixed.
Okay.
But there's certain things that happen through general wear and tear.
Yes.
So let's say, for example, you move in and the air conditioner. We know it. We can't be without an air conditioner in Israel, especially in the summer. So if you've moved into the apartment and a month, 2 months after you've done the air conditioning, and there's no gas.
Yes.
That is the landlord liability to make sure that the gas is topped up.
Now, is that just common knowledge, or is that something that can be stipulated in the contract?
Okay, first of all, in most of the contracts, it is stipulated, but it's stipulated generally.
Okay.
It's what we call general wear and tear.
Okay.
So if the gas has been filled in, and it's fine, and then a year later, it's because you've used the air conditioner, so the onus will then be on you as the tenant to fill up the gas.
Okay.
But if you filled up with gas and a month later, there's another problem, the gas, there's no more gas, well, there's obviously a leak.
Yes.
So that now going to fall on the owner. It's the owner's responsibility to sort out the leak and to redo and to put in and to refill it with gas.
Gotcha.
It's the same thing also with the geyser, for example.
Yes.
If there's a problem with the element, this is something that is it's done through general use.
Yes.
It's not something that, well, because you used because you used it,
right?
You used the geyser 5 hours a day, that it went. Yes. No, it's general wear and tear. Gotcha. That's what happens. The geyser can go. So that would be something that would be an onus on the landlord.
Right.
But if you break something,
right? Well,
for example, you use the toilet.
Yes.
Often happens. There's the handle breaks or it doesn't. But that's from general use.
Yes.
You've been using it. Yeah. It's a small item. That's not an issue.
Okay.
The problems come when there are bigger issues that get involved.
You got a leak in the roof.
Okay, so a leak in the roof, first of all, is automatic. Anything that's constructional is the landlord.
So structural issues belong to the landlord.
100% are to the landlord.
Okay.
There's another thing also that the tenant must take into account, and that there are certain expenses that are landlord expenses, and there are expenses that are tenant expenses.
Okay.
So all the amenities, as I mentioned earlier, are tenant expenses to such an extent that they're actually registered in the tenant's name.
Yes.
In other words, your municipality will be registered in the tenant's name. It's the owner's apartment, but you'll be registered as a tenant, and the tenant will be liable for all the municipal taxes, water, lights, all of that. All will be registered in the tenant's, and all be registered in the tenant's name.
So maybe just to summarize, for people who are watching who haven't rented in Israel before, some of those, and you can correct me if I missed something. So the arnona is your basically
municipal tax.
Your municipal tax, which you'll have registered at the local municipality.
Correct.
You'll have the lights put in your name. You'll have the gas put in your name. You'll have the electricity so the light's put in your name, then there's also what we call Vaad Bayit,
which is the building main, the levies.
The levies, which you were also responsible for. Which, if you live in a big building, you'll pay to some company that oversees it, or you'll pay it
to the Vaad, directly to the management company, or directly to the people that to the building, the committee on the building.
So those are some of the costs you must look at over and above your rent.
Correct. Now there's one other thing which especially foreigners find it difficult to understand, and they don't like the idea, but that's the way it's done. When you do over and above your security, you're going to give 5 checks. Yes, listen to me carefully. Blank and signed. Okay, so it's 5 checks, blank and signed. In other words, there's no amount written in the check. Why is that? So one will be made out to the electrical company. One will be made out to the municipality. One will be made out to all the different, the water, the gas, and the building main, to the levy. This is simply so that even though all these amenities are registered in your name and you are liable for them, but if, for argument's sake...
You mean these are given to the landlord?
Yes, these blank checks are given to the landlord, which the landlord holds as a security. Why? Because if, for argument's sake, you default on your electricity bill or on your municipal tax, now, your rental agreement is finished, but there's still a bill outstanding. The bill is your bill. The municipality, the electricity,
but isn't it still my bill anyway, because it's in my name?
Correct.
So it's still my liability.
Correct. It's still your liability. Right. But if the landlord wants to sell his apartment, he cannot sell it until he has a clean sheet. Okay. In other words, that electrical account is associated to the apartment. Even though you are liable for it, but the landlord can't sell the apartment because there's an outstanding amount, no matter what it is. So for that reason, the tenant leaves 5 blank checks.
But that doesn't always have to be the case. For example, I must have had really great landlords. I didn't have to do that with my landlords. They never asked me for that.
I can tell you that 90% of the time, that's a landlord will ask for that. You got lucky. Definitely, you got lucky.
So what I'm saying is that you can negotiate, and there's some landlords that are less strict than others. For example, is what I'm saying.
Look,
basically.
I'm going to put it like this. It's very simple. All right, for a tenant who doesn't have bad intentions. Okay, won't have a problem with that, because the landlord can do absolutely nothing with those checks. You got to understand, the landlord can do nothing with those checks. Only if you've defaulted, if the electricity bill hasn't been paid, or the water bill hasn't been paid. You've got to understand, in Israel, you are not allowed to cut off somebody's water because he hasn't paid his water bill. Okay, it's not allowed by law. You're protecting the tenant. So there has to be some kind of a way to protect the landlord in that case. So if the tenant doesn't have bad intentions, there shouldn't be a problem. Because at the end of the day, that check, it's only made out to Chevrat Chashmal, to the electrical company.
So you actually write on the check.
Yes, it's to the Chevrat Chashmal, and you'll cross it. Lamutav bilvad. So it can only be paid to the electrical company.
Understand.
Okay? So as far as, you don't have to be, as far as the tenant's concerned, you don't have to worry about that. It's not the end of the world. It's really not the end of the world. It's, in fact, if the tenant pays all his bills and the tenant has no bad intentions, there's no reason why there should be a problem. The reason that it happens is if there's a problem, the landlord at least is covered. And now, because of, and it could be a small amount, you could be talking about maybe 300, 400, 500 shekels. But because of 300, 400, 500 shekels, the landlord can't sell his apartment. And that's just not fair to the landlord.
Got you. Okay, so now when I want to move into the apartment, and the same as when I leave the apartment, are there certain things that I'm obligated to do when I leave, so that I can expect when I go into the apartment? For example, a painted apartment. Is there should there be an oven in the apartment? All these, what are standard things to expect when I move in, and what are standard things that should be done when I move out?
Okay, so I'll put it like this. As most of you know, there's nothing standard in Israel. Absolutely nothing standard. All depends on what you need and what there is. Right. If there's an oven in the apartment and you need the oven, yes, you'll keep it.
Yes.
If there's an oven and you don't need it, you'll tell the landlord, I don't need the oven, take it out. End of story.
Right. Right. And again, I guess it comes also down to making sure that everything is clarified in the contract. So, for example, when I leave, am I obligated to paint the apartment?
Right. So what normally happens, I'll tell you what normally happens in the rental, in an agreement, you can either move in as is,
yes,
and then you leave as is.
Okay.
Or if you've moved in painted, you need to leave it painted.
Yes.
Now, what's painted? If there's a bit of a mark on the wall and you take and splash some paint on it, so because paint fades, you're going to have different shades, which is going to be seen very easily,
right,
and that's not going to work, and your landlord's not going to be happy. So he's going to expect you to paint it. So what I recommend is do it once. You take the apartment. Normally, after a rental contract is normally for a year with an option period.
Okay, that's we'll the normal. Or it depends on again. A lot of these things are hashed out in the contract. If you
correct.
1 year, 2 years.
We'll discuss. We'll go into that in a minute. Okay. But when you take an apartment, say for example, you've stayed in the apartment for at least a year and an option which is at least 2 years.
Okay.
So if you stayed in the apartment for 2 years and you're going to give the apartment back, you've lived in the apartment, yes, it's going to need a painting.
You're right.
Okay, so you're going to have to paint the apartment, especially what's going to happen. You're going to find behind the cupboards, in front of, these things are going to need to be done.
Yes.
So it's going to be painted. The norm is to get the apartment painted and to give it back painted.
Right.
Some people will say, well, give it to me as is. I'm happy to live with it as it is, and I'll make do. And then they'll just fix it up for themselves,
yes,
which is also an option. Okay, it's all a matter of, I wouldn't say it's negotiating, but it's what suits both parties.
Right.
Regarding, this is something which is very important to understand and which is a norm. Okay, again, it depends on what's written in the contract, but normally a landlord, if you're doing a long-term rental, not a short-term, in other words, the difference between the two,
yes,
is a short-term rental is being done over a couple of weeks,
yes,
maybe a month, which is probably a holiday home, which will be fully kitted out from A to Z.
Also, sometimes people use it as like a stopgap. So, for example, let's say I'm making Aliyah, I'm moving to Israel in May, and I only managed to get a lease, for example, on my new apartment that I'm going to be moving into in July, and that's a year.
Correct.
Now I need a stopgap somewhere to stay for 2 months.
Correct.
Right?
Okay. So there's two ways. That's number one. Also, of late, what we've been using, what's been happening a lot, is people that have been coming and they need to be in quarantine before they can move into their. So they'll do a 2-week quarantine period in one of these what we call a short-term rental.
Yes.
It's a short-term rental.
Okay.
Holiday homes, things like that are normally the short-term rentals. Those can be anything from 2 weeks to a month.
Okay.
But the pricing is also completely different. But on a short-term rental, there's no amenities are not included. Don't have to be put. The amenities in a short.
You have to change over the amenities that you want to.
The short-term rentals, the amenities are on the onus of the landlord, except for electricity. The electricity, you have a meter reading of the electricity when you move in and when you move out, because you can have the air conditioner running 24/7, especially in summer, and You don't know, and I mean that can run up a hell of electricity
bill. The norm
bill.
would be you would pay the rental for the short term and the electricity for that.
Correct. Okay, but then on the long-term rentals, which are normally for a year plus an option period.
Yes.
Now, the option period can be anything. Normally, if it's somebody wants a long-term rental, let's say, for example, you want to rent something for 2 or 3 years.
Yes.
So what you'll do is you'll take the rental period, which will be a year, and then you'll have an option period. Now, the option period is the tenant's option, not the owner's option.
So the owner doesn't have any say in the option? After a year, the owner can't say, listen, I want to move back in?
If it's agreed upon,
yes.
If it's agreed upon, then yes.
So again, we come back to the contract.
Yes, okay. But normally it is the tenant's option it's the tenant's option of utilizing the option, of materializing the option. The landlord can stop the option if the tenant hasn't fulfilled his contract.
But he can't just say, listen, we're not going to do the option.
No.
And how long normally do I need to let the landlord know that I'm going to exercise that option?
All right. So normally in the standard contract, this is normally between 60 and 90 days.
Okay.
That gives, because you've got to give the landlord time to find another tenant in place of you or the existing tenant in the building. But again, it's the important part of here is if you've fulfilled all your obligations of the contract, there is no reason why the landlord can say to you, I want my apartment back. It doesn't work that way. In fact, even if the landlord sells the apartment, your lease remains intact. In other words, he's selling the apartment with your lease.
Right.
So the sale of the apartment will include the lease.
So when he sells, somebody can't come along and boot me out the apartment?
No, because the lease is part of the contract.
Got you.
Will be part of the sales contract.
Got it.
And if it's for a year and 2 years option, a year and a year's option, all happens the same thing.
So those options will still stand for me. The guy can't come along and cancel.
Exactly. It's part of the contract.
Got it.
What will often happen is you'll have a lease, an option period, and another option period. Okay. So now the question would be, why would I need 2 option periods? Right. So it's very simple, because if for argument's sake you've had your first lease at, let's say, 5,000 shekels per month. Okay. Your second option period, the norm in the lease is either market value or anything between 2 to 5%, which is negotiable, is the increment on the lease.
Should I expect an annual increase, or can I sign a 2-year contract at the same amount?
Right. Yes, you can.
Okay.
Now, here again, and I'll always say this to a landlord, rather a good tenant at the same lease than an extra 100 or 200 shekels increment per year, because those 100 or 200 shekels at the end of the day can cost you a lot more. So if you have a good tenant, you know what, instead of giving a 200 shekel increment, so you'll have a 100 shekel increment a month. Make it good. Now, that's, again, why am I saying do a year and an option? Because in that first year, you as the tenant are going to get to know the landlord. Yes. The landlord is going to get to know you as the tenant.
Yes.
If you're happy with the landlord and the landlord's happy with you, there's no reason why the extension couldn't sign even further. But if after a year, and you don't like the landlord, and he's sitting on you here every day, okay, and he wants to come in, you're going to get fed up with him as well. He can't just walk in, and it's also part of the contract.
Yes.
Part of the contract, the landlord can come and visit the apartment, or anybody who meant, or on his behalf, to come and visit the apartment. It normally happens every 6 months or something like that, but at least with a 48-hour notice.
Okay.
Another question that often comes up is changing the locks.
Okay.
Okay. So this will also probably be part of the contract, which says that if you change the locks, which you're entitled to, you are obliged to give the landlord one key.
Okay.
Because if, God forbid, there's something that you're not in the apartment and there's a burst pipe or whatever it is, and someone needs to get into the apartment, well, then the landlord has to be able to get into the apartment.
Got it.
That's the first thing. Another thing to make sure is pets.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, because first of all, Israel generally is pet friendly. I have not yet come across a building or a block of flats that have said no to pets. Okay, but you could have a landlord who is renting out a furnished apartment.
Yes.
And doesn't want dogs and cats on his couches.
Yes.
Because for whatever reason, which is legitimate, actually doesn't matter what the reason is, which is 100% legitimate.
Right.
The thing is to clarify. Once these things are clarified in advance, all is good.
Again, your contract comes into play, discussion,
yes.
Understanding each other.
Part of your contract.
I'm coming with pets. Do you allow pets in the building? Do you allow me to move in with pets into the apartment?
Yes, absolutely, okay. Absolutely.
We touched on it briefly before about, short-term rentals, how they can help us. Often what happens in Israel when people are renting, or what happens from time to time, is there's an overlap or there's a delay in timing. So, for example, I'm going to make Aliyah. I've made plans to make Aliyah in July, but the apartment that I want is available. The person wants to put in a tenant from May. Or the other side, I'm making Aliyah in July, and the apartment that I'm moving into is only available in September. So sometimes I need to sign the lease earlier than I need it, and sometimes I need something as a stopgap, because my lease is only going to come into effect 2 months after I arrive. What are some ways that I can, we've talked about short-term rentals. Are there ways to negate those payments and things like that in the meantime?
So what we've been doing, we had a lot of that, especially in the last year, where we've had a lot of people that are making Aliyah, and they need to move into an apartment. So first of all, the important part is that in order to make Aliyah, you need an address.
Yes.
So part of that is you're going to probably sign your rental agreement before you make Aliyah.
Correct.
More or less when you're expecting to make your Aliyah.
Yeah.
So the problem only actually comes if there's a tenant who's moving out at a certain date,
yes,
and you're going to move in on a certain date. So that's normally where the problem comes in liaising and getting the dates correct. Again, the only option to short-circuit that, well, it's not really short-circuiting it, is actually to do a short-term rental for a week, or 2 weeks, or something like that. But I would say again, in most cases, you asked your first question is, why do you need a broker? Well, that's exactly why you need a broker. Because a broker will sort those things out for you.
Right.
The broker will negotiate the deal so that it suits both sides.
Yes.
It has to suit both sides. It has to be a win-win. And that's why you need a broker.
And let's be honest, sometimes you just have to bite the bullet, as they say. So, for example, let's say I've made all my plans in terms of leaving my previous country, wherever it may be, and all my tickets are booked, and I'm coming in July. But my dream house in exactly the spot that I want, the landlord, it's available from May, and the landlord doesn't want it standing empty because he can get another tenant in. If I want to secure that, I will basically sign it from the date, even though I'm not going to be living there, and I'm just going to have to pay that month or two, even though I'm not living in the apartment.
All right, so I'll give you a perfect example. We've got a family that are making Aliyah now from Brazil. It's a family with children and the parents.
Yes.
So we've now got 2 apartments that need to be available on a certain date.
Yes.
So the one apartment, actually we found the perfect apartment. It suited them for their family. The problem was the parents.
Yes.
So what we've arranged for their parents' apartment was that they're signing the lease. The lease is actually going to be, I can't remember the exact date, but for argument's sake, the lease will be from July.
Yes.
But they'll pay the expenses from June.
Okay.
That way, the landlord is not going to be out of pocket.
Got it.
Okay, because water, lights, you're only paying for usage anyway. No one's in the apartment, so there's no usage.
Right.
But what there will be, there's levy.
Yes.
So you'll have the building levy and the municipal tax.
Yes.
So the building levy and the municipal tax, the tenants will pay for that.
Yes.
But the rent, they'll start paying from July. But
Okay.
but the expenses, they'll pay June as well.
Okay.
This way, it's like I said, it's a win-win situation.
Absolutely.
For both parties.
Right.
And this is something that we can negotiate on behalf of the tenant and behalf of whoever's making Aliyah or coming to live in Israel. So the landlord's not out of pocket.
So so people are negotiable. There are workarounds.
Absolutely, of course.
Everybody's open to discussing these things, and you can come up with solutions.
Again, everything is available at a price.
Right.
Everything's available at a price.
Got you. So we've touched on a lot of points here. Is there anything or any tips from your experience that you think that would be interesting to know, or that might be valuable to know that we haven't spoken about?
Yes. So the first and the most important, when you move into the apartment, day one, I suggest you do a walk around with the landlord. And it's not just write things down. We have we have a protocol which is signed by both parties.
Yes.
And to take pictures to see this is broken, this has happened, so that things don't come back on you afterwards. Well, you broke this tile. Well, if you never saw the tile was broken, then it obviously wasn't.
Right.
But if it's registered and it's there, everybody knows about, and it's written. It's like I said before, the reason we have a contract, the reason why we note and put on paper all these things, we do the walk around and we see all these things, it's so that when the contract's over, we'll remain friends afterwards. Absolutely. As well. So that's another thing. So as long as everything is known and we've spoken about everything in advance, so that's one thing, the walk around, which is very important.
Okay.
On the same time of the walk around is we take pictures of the electricity meter. So you take a picture because from this minute on, the gas, electricity and water is on my onus. Right. I'm responsible for paying it.
And you've now recorded exactly what it is the moment you walked in.
Exactly, and it's recorded. And I'll tell you another thing. Today, all these things get transferred. You don't even have to go to the electricity department. So you just pick up the phone, we speak to whoever we speak to, we send them the picture, gets done, gets registered, end of story. So that's another important part of the rental.
So that would be water, electricity, gas. Right?
Yes, those are the three amenities that are there.
Yeah, that's great. Selwyn, once again, thank you for your time. It's been really informative. Again, just to reiterate, something that came up time and time again, always make sure that there's a good solid contract in place to govern the relationship so that there's no misunderstandings, and also make sure that you understand the contract and the contents of it so that there's no surprises at some point during the rental period. And make sure you have a reputable broker who can look after your interests. Absolutely. Thank you, Selwyn. Thank you.